So maybe you have been listening to my podcast, you're binging on the content, and you're not really seeing growth. So you're working on the SEO and you're hustling those keywords, but still it's like, I'm not sure something is wrong here. Well, you're in luck because today I'm going to go over 4 mistakes that you might be doing in your podcast that are preventing you from growing. So let's get started. Okay, I'm just going to be super honest here and say that this might be a reality check for you. So don't feel triggered by the things I'm going to say. These are just things that I observe as a podcast management agency owner. So these are the things that I'm going to share with you. So don't take it personally. This is just an area that you can improve upon. So let's do this. So number 1 is that you're not actually prioritizing your podcast. So what I mean by that is your podcast is kind of like a second thought. So you're not batching your episodes, you're focusing on other pieces of content on social media, and you're spending all this time doing all this content everywhere else. But when it comes to your podcast, if you skip a week or 2 or 3, you're like, it's fine. And maybe it bothers you, but like at some point it doesn't really bother you anymore. So here's the thing. If you want podcasting to work for you, you actually have to work for it. So I always say this every single time, but make the podcast the cornerstone for your marketing, meaning prioritize your podcast and then recycle content from your podcast. Do not work hard here. You can easily sit down every single month and batch out the content for like 4 to 6 weeks at one point. And by doing that alone, you're going to save yourself so much time, and you know that you have content for weeks to come. So prioritize your podcast and make it be the number 1 thing that you actually do, and let it be the number 1 way that you actually communicate with your audience. Remember that when people are listening to you on a podcast, you have their 10, 15, 20 minutes of undivided attention. Whereas on any other platform, you literally have seconds of their attention. So make it a habit that the podcast is the main thing and everything else is everything else. Number 2 mistake that you're making is that you're going off on tangents and you're going on and on and on and on and on about things that don't necessarily apply to your listener. Now, let's break this down a bit further. You have 2 types of listeners at any given point in your podcasting journey. You have the people who have been listening to you, who have been in the journey with you for a long time. And you also have the people who are stumbling upon your content for the first time ever today in this moment. So you need to make sure that your content caters to both. So while I am a huge fan of you making sure that you are infusing your personality into everything that you do so people can actually connect with you on a deeper level, please don't start your episode talking about your trip to Target and the things that you got that have like nothing to do with the actual episode. So you have to think about how is it serving my current audience, my fans that actually come back for me week after week, but also the new people that have no clue who I am, who's like, if we're being honest, I have not earned my stripes with them yet. So keep those 2 people in mind and be concise in your podcast episodes. Yes, absolutely. Bring your personality. And if your trip to Target has something to do with the podcast episode, absolutely talk about it. But you need to give context. Don't just go off on tangents that have nothing to do with your actual episode. The 3rd mistake that you might be making is that your episodes are overwhelming. So you may think that I'm just here to serve and I want people to come in and get out of this podcast episode knowing how to do everything from A to Z. But here's the thing. If you start to give people way too many things to do and you start to list out long lists of things and you're telling them their life story and how to fix it, you're going to lose people because it becomes super long and super overwhelming, and overwhelmed people do not take action. So make sure that on your podcast episodes, you talk about one thing at a time, that your episodes have a goal, and every single episode has one goal. So before you even sit down to record, ask yourself, what is the goal of this podcast episode? And trust me, there is not ever an episode that is supposed to completely overhaul somebody's life. Just help them with one thing and one thing only. So that way your episodes are concise, they're not super long, they're not overwhelming. And when people are done listening to your podcast episode, they feel like they can actually take action and hopefully come work with you. The 4th mistake that you might be making is that your visual, your branding is not on point. Now, hey, listen, I don't talk about this a whole lot, but here's the truth. When it comes to the podcast, you have to remember that people see your thumbnail like literally like an inch by an inch. So every little thing counts. So of course, you have heard me say again and again that SEO matters and you need to be very strategic about your keywords. But that's just number one. So if we're thinking about the steps that somebody's taking to find your podcast episode, they're opening up the podcast app, they're going to the search option, they're typing up something, for example, how to do XYZ, and then hopefully your podcast comes up, right? And it comes up first. The next thing that people are judging whether or not they want to listen to your podcast is the little tiny, teeny thumbnail that they get to see on the podcast app. So if it looks like a 2-year-old made it on Canva, it's not going to fly. So make sure that your podcast cover art is on point, that the rest of your visuals, that your branding looks beautiful. So it actually attracts people and it makes them want to listen, because this is all happening subconsciously very fast. And it's not like we're aware that we're doing this as human beings, but we're always judging. We're human beings. We do it. So make sure that every single thing that is part of your podcast, like your podcast package, is on point and attracting listeners in. Now, if you are in the beginning stages of podcasting, some of these things that I mentioned today may not actually apply to you. So I want you to go back and listen to episode 211, where I break down 3 beginner mistakes that you might be making. And also, if you're like, okay, girl, this is the first time that I'm hearing you talk about SEO, I don't know what that is, go back and listen to episode 215, where I talk about SEO and why it's important in all the things. Also, I just want to mention that if you are more of a DIY person and you want the roadmap, the literal blueprint to grow your podcast, to get more downloads, to grow your influence, then I have a program for you that I will leave linked for you down below so you can go ahead and check it out. But if you have a lot of things on your hand right now, a lot on your plate, and you don't actually have the time to go ahead and focus on podcasting and all of the things and recycling content and uploading and making sure you stay consistent, the things that I have talked to you about today, then let's work together. I own a podcast marketing agency, and this is exactly what we do. So you record, you give us a podcast episode, and we do so many things with a podcast episode that you wouldn't believe the amount of reach that you can actually get when you work with us. So go ahead and book a call if you're interested in that. And if you're not yet subscribed, make sure you do, because next week I am breaking down the recipe of how I launched my podcast to an audience of 0 back in May of 2020, when the whole world was basically launching a podcast. It was the competitive time for you to launch a show. I started my podcast then, launched to no one, and today I'm sitting on a top 0.5% podcast. So make sure that you tune back in next week. Until next time, may you find God's love, peace, grace, and mercy, and I'll see you then. Bye.